This video contains elements that are not suitable for children under the age of 14. Viewer discretion is advised.
One winter's night when the cold wind blew, the engines found it hard to sleep.
What we need,
Suggested Toby,
is to listen to a story.
How about the next episode of Sodorama?
said Percy.
You just won't stop going on about it, will you?
Replied Doug,
I think it'd be interesting to hear what Zack's got to say about the next series.
said Thomas.
Right you are, Thomas. This is indeed going to be an interesting edition of Sodorama. Okay, first off, I want to apologize for something I missed out on in the previous episode. In 1990, Thomas was first broadcast in Japan following the success of the first two series. What made the franchise a huge success there was how prevalent railways were in everyday life, and was the first foreign dub to include individual voice actors, being narrated by Leo Morimoto and starring Keiko Toda as Thomas himself. Thomas was so big in Japan that it spawned a few specials exclusive to that country, such as Thomas in the UK trip, a crossover with Punkiki that included exclusively filmed footage alongside series free, some video games, and a lot of merchandise that's hard to find unless you look for a good price on eBay. Heck, even before the show was created, Wilbur Autry's books were also translated into Japanese in 1973. No love for Christopher's books, apparently. Whew! Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to Series 4, shall we? By the start of the 1990s, Thomas Mania had reached its peak worldwide, but not all was well within. Because of the success of the TV series, this had an impact on the Railway series and Christopher Autry's writing, being forced to write books that focused heavily on Thomas, such as Thomas and the Great Railway Show. No, that's too early. We're not even there yet. There. That's better. A book that featured Thomas leaving Sodor to visit the National Railway Museum representing the Northwestern Railway. The follow-up book, Thomas Comes Home, focused upon what happened back on his branch line while Thomas was away, but he wouldn't appear until the last illustration of the book. And then, when Christopher tried to get Barry the Rescue Engine published, it was rejected by Egmont, and instead, he was forced to write Thomas and the Fat Controller's engines, only including Thomas's name as a marketing ploy. Ironically, when Christopher's books went out of print, that was the hardest to find. Another reason for Barry's book being rejected was because young fans wanted Thomas and his friends, not any more new engines. Yet that didn't stop the introduction of Pip and Emma in the books. Because of Thomas's fame, characters like Oliver and Bear were relegated to the sidelines, so who knows what Christopher might have done with him had Egmont not forced him to include too much Thomas. And that's another attitude that isn't changing as of 2020. As Wilbur Autry once put it,
they're so obsessed with the popularity of Thomas that they have what I can only call crane-shunted Thomas to all sorts of unlikely places in order to get him into or force him into a particular story, whether the story was written with Thomas in mind or not.
Which brings me on to Series 4 itself. Like Series 3 prior, it was released first on VHS in the United Kingdom, with the first 11 episodes, excluding You Can't Win, Four Little Engines, and Peter Sam and the Refreshment Lady, having a few differences in narration, as well as some music cues and sound effects being removed. Michael Angeles could be heard inhaling while recording his narration, but for later releases, it was edited out to provide a more polished product. Series 4 was the first to introduce the Skarloey Railway and its first 7 engines: Skarloey, Rheneas, Sir Handel, Peter Sam, Rusty, Duncan, and Duke. The first 15 episodes focused exclusively on them, but so much for making the characters familiar with American audiences, because Bert Allcroft really oversaturated their presence. It's not that I have anything against the characters, but wouldn't it have made better sense to have 3 or 4 at a time, with standard gauge episodes in between? That's where I feel Series 22 to 24 succeeded in that area, providing a balance by switching between Sodor-based stories and international stories. If they had aired the international episodes all in one go, I'm sure fans would have gotten sick of them, perhaps more than they already were, and just want to see how things are going on Sodor. The adaptations are, how can I put this delicately, loose. And by loose, I mean they were adapted out of order, such as the stories from Duke the Lost Engine being adapted first rather than last, and with Sleeping Beauty being adapted as the second story rather than the fourth. I go into fuller details regarding the episodes being produced and aired out of the original Railway series order, but Duke making cameos in episodes where he's supposed to be buried alive in the shed is just the tip of the iceberg. Four Little Engines, the book, not the episode, was butchered so horribly. Skarloey remembers an old faithful were mashed mashed together to form Four Little Engines, the episode, not the book, but it just doesn't work and it shows. The coaches hate Sir Handel for no reason, Edward's sent to the works for no reason. Even if it took place after Old Iron, it's still a continuity nightmare since we see Duck, Douglas, and Oliver making cameos, and it's never even said if Scarlet had been sent away to be repaired outside of Sodor. A bad day for Sir Handel, however, is an even worse offender since we're introduced to the first 4 Scarlet engines again, and having it air after 4 Little Engines just makes the continuity a bigger mess than it is. Yeah, this is going to be a recurring complaint throughout this review, and remember, these decisions were made by a woman who thought the missing coach would confuse children. Peter Sam and the Refreshment Lady was a pretty faithful adaptation, as were the adaptations from Little Old Engine and Gallant Old Engine, although in the latter case, prior to the episode of the same name, we've seen Rheneas in the background when he's supposed to be at the works. Dare I mention? But then we come to the most infamous episode of the series, probably one of the most infamous of the classic series as a whole, Rusty to the Rescue. And I'm sorry to say this, because I'm about to piss off a lot of fans, but this episode is the absolute worst of the entire show. Not because of the overall production quality, but for what it represents. It shows that Bert Allcroft does not give the slightest damn about what Audrey created 50 years ago. Episodes down the road that are also hated by fans, Middle Engine, Rheneas and the Dinosaur, Edward Strikes Out, Don't Go Back, Fiery Flynn, Sodor Surprise Date, The Other Side of the Mountain, Apology Impossible, the list goes on. None of them have a patch on Rusty to the Rescue. Oh, that hot take is not going to make me any friends.
You're damn right it won't. Anyone who claims that those crappy episodes, along with Wonky Whistle and Forever and Fucking Ever, are better than Rusty to the Rescue is an enemy of mine.
Zack, that was my first episode of the whole show, and the episode which made Rusty my favorite narrow gauge engine as a kid. How dare you say something as harsh as that, comparing that to the awful CGI episodes, hit middle era episodes, and Middle Engine. Rusty to the Rescue, unlike those episodes. No one was written out of character, Rusty's heart was in the right place, and the plot wasn't stupid and fits in with what we already know about the show.
Well, I would still say that Peter Sam and the Refreshment Lady was the first episode of Season 4 that I approached, but I'll get more into that later when I...
Cameron, what the hell are you doing here?
What? I thought everyone here was sharing their thoughts on Series 4.
No! We're gonna teach Zack a lesson for even thinking that Rusty to the Rescue is the worst episode of the show, when it's not even close, much less even saying that.
Guys, calm down. I'm sure Zack has a perfectly good explanation for why he hates Rusty to the Rescue, so let's hear him out, okay?
Thank you, Mike.
It better be a good reason, because I've heard enough people say that the original is better just because it's the original, without any other claims to back this up.
Let's just listen to Zack, and then maybe that will give you time to piece together what you want to say. Sound good?
Okay, Mike.
Okie dokie, Mike.
Fine. But just remember, this isn't over, Zack. I'll deal with you once you finish this review.
Alright, so where do I begin with this? In real life, the Bluebell Railway is a heritage railway based in Sussex in England, and was the first preserved standard gauge steam-operated railway in the world. Their first engine was an ex-London, Brighton and South Coast Railway A1X Class Terrier number 55, given the name Stepney. Stepney was built in 1875, rebuilt in 1912, and arrived on the Bluebell in 1960, eventually landing in the Railway series 3 years later. For Bert Allcroft's vision of the show, the Bluebell is a branch line on Sodor that got its name because it's surrounded by bluebells and runs alongside the Skarloey Railway, which kind of makes the role of the Skarloey Railway redundant, but that's neither here nor there, and Stepney is a Sodor resident. Look, I get that Bert Allcroft wanted Sodor to feel more like a universal place, but that doesn't mean I agree with her decision. If a child in the 90s can understand some cultures beyond America, then surely they can learn something about British culture. People say she understood the franchise better than Mattel is doing right now, but even in 1995, I don't think she did once Thomas's popularity grew, and to be honest, I kind of blame Shining Time Station for that. Also, I don't have full evidence to prove it, but from what I've read, Bert Allcroft made an attempt, and a frankly stupid one at that, to sue the Bluebell Railway for infringing on Stepney's television counterpart, despite the fact that he was built in the 19th century. And this was after Audrey died, by the way. She then tried the same tactic on the Tallyclin Railway, despite Audrey approving of them, dressing up their engines like their Skarloey counterparts, and the Needham Valley Railway, despite Audrey naming one of their locomotives Thomas in 1971, and yet people still say she understood the franchise? If that's the case, then I hate to imagine what people say about George Lucas being the only person who understood Star Wars. If I was to draw parallels between Thomas and Star Wars, then Brit's attempted lawsuits against the aforementioned railways to try and gain the money they don't owe her is the equivalent to Greedo shooting first. What's all that got to do with Rusty to the Rescue? Well, Audrey based his stories off of real-life events and depicted Stepney's backstory with tact and grace. This episode is the antithesis of what Audrey envisioned and, along with Magic Railroad, proves just how little Britt Allcroft really cared about the franchise. And yes, I'd rather watch any episode from the Big World Big Adventures era over this 4.5-minute turd, and that's not an exaggeration or a joke. And we're not even a quarter of the way through this marathon. I just find it pathetic that people get upset with Mattel screwing up their handling of the franchise, yet despite Britt's misguided actions, people give her a free pass because she developed the show in the first place? Okay, maybe that's not the reason, but even if it were, it's not a very good one. Anyway, on to the rest of the episodes of Series 4. After the Skarlovic stories, quality takes a nosedive and never fully recovers. I've already gone in depth with Rusty to the Rescue, but what about the rest of the Stepney saga? Thomas and Stepney is an okay merger between Bluebells of England and Stepney Special. Not much else to say here, apart from the fact that it's Bertie. Thomas gets jealous of, dislikes another engine cliche. Train stops playing and bowled out were pretty solid overall. And then we come to the last 8 episodes of the series, which just makes Series 4 more of a continuity nightmare than it really is. Henry the Elephant came 11 years too late, and they probably shouldn't have bothered adapting it for television. Bullseyes and Toad Stands By, while not bad adaptations overall, could have been used in Series 2 and 3 respectively, with the latter being swapped out for Bulgy, and the former probably replacing a Christopher story. Thomas in the Special Letter was a pretty good way to celebrate the 100th episode of the show, and it helps that the original story, the Fat Controller's Engines, wasn't really connected to the others in the 8 famous engines, so it works well as a standalone. Paint Pots and Queens, however, is the worst of the leftovers. This should have been adapted back in Series 1, and maybe have Thomas's Christmas Party be a standalone mini-special. Heck, it even references Off the Rails and Down the Mine for goodness sake, and yet Duck and Donald are spotted in the background. I've criticized continuity throughout Series 4, and this episode is the worst offender of the bunch. It wouldn't have been so bad if they took liberties like they did in Series 3, but if they couldn't, then what's the point? Even though the video's been unlisted, Big Engines 87 goes into greater detail about Paint Pots and Queens being a mess of an adaptation. The last 3 episodes were all written by Christopher Audrey. Fish, Special Attraction, which mashed up Toby's Seaside Holiday and Bulstrode, and Mind That Bike. All of them are fine adaptations, although the first half of Special Attraction was just filler. Not much else to say on that. Overall, the episode quality for Series 4 was a step down from the previous 3, and the continuity being all screwed up didn't help matters. The model work is some of the best of the entire series, especially how they made the original narrow gauge models to work around the existing standard gauge models, but sadly, Peter Eve's models for the Skarlovi engines were extremely problematic to work with, especially with their side rods being sourced from old 00 scale triangle models modified to slightly fit. This caused the models to run badly behind the scenes, and there was no way to fit a smoke mechanism or the battery and receiver needed for the remote control eyes, so they had to be hidden if the eyes were going to move. This eventually resulted in large scale models being made starting with Series 5, and would continue to be used for the rest of the model era with the exception of Series 8. Starting with Series 3, songs for the show began to be composed by Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell, beginning with Thomas We Love You, or Thomas's Anthem if you're going by the American title. Along with Thomas's Anthem, more music videos were made alongside the 4th series, having previously been composed for the audiobook story Thomas and the Best Kept Station competition, with 2 exceptions being That's What Friends Are For and Rules and Regulations. Mike O'Donnell said that music videos for both had been made, but for whatever reason, they'd never been released. In the case of the former, it was because the song was too sad for the overall tone of the show. The official music videos we have now for them contain CGI footage, although the songs were edited down. Wouldn't it be nice to get the original music videos with model footage? There are some recreations online, but we can only dream about what the official versions were like. Series 4 was the last to have narration from George Carlin, who then went on to resume his comedy career, while Michael Angelis would carry on up to Series 16. And finally, I made the decision on who I prefer, George Carlin or Ringo Starr. Honestly, I'm a lot more familiar with George's narration for the first 2 series than I am for Ringo's, so I have to choose George. Don't get me wrong, Ringo did pretty fair with them, but George's narration felt a lot more lively in my opinion, as well as giving every character their own voices. Even in the episodes I didn't like for the first 4 series, the one thing I can never hate is George's narration. He brought forth his A-game for every episode he narrated, and it's a great shame that he's no longer with us, so thanks George for providing me and many other Americans American fans with so many great childhood memories. You'll never be forgotten. Series 4 overall hasn't aged very well. Visually it's beautiful, but they're sadly let down by poor writing decisions and sloppy continuity. That being said, I can understand why people would love it after many years. The music is some of the best of the show, and the model work is fantastic, and the narration by Angelus and Carlin for both sides of the Atlantic still hold up to this day. So far it's my least favorite of the classic era, but it is a series that I respect a lot more than I love these days. It's an okay series overall, but as one era comes to a close, another one begins. And I better hide until the next episode just so I don't get attacked for what I said about a certain episode. TTFN!
Well, a big blue and brown